Did you think the truth would always stay hidden? Today everything is over! This can't be true, you are lying!
Martha walked to the dining table and placed the manila envelope directly onto the serving platter, where the lamb should have been. She leaned in, her lips inches from her husband's ear, and whispered the secret she had held like a blade for 4 decades. "If you touch me again, Arthur, I won't just tell them about the money. I'll tell them about the night at the lake, and this time the whole world will be listening." The silver anniversary clock on the mantel ticked with a rhythmic, clinical precision that mirrored Martha's life. For 40 years, she had been the silence between her husband's shouts and the cushion beneath her children's falls. At 62, her hands were mapped with faint blue veins. But they were steady as she polished the mahogany dining table for the evening celebration. "Martha, where is my blue silk tie?" Arthur's voice boomed from the top of the stairs, carrying that familiar edge of practiced helplessness that was actually a command. Martha didn't look up. She kept her strokes circular. The third drawer of the bureau. "Arthur. Behind the cedar box." "It's not here." A beat of silence. "Oh, found it." Why do you always hide things in plain sight? Because you only see what you expect to see, Martha thought, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. She wasn't an invisible woman. She was a woman who had mastered the art of being overlooked. It was a strategic retreat she had begun decades ago to keep the peace for their 3 children. The evening was meant to be a crowning achievement. Arthur's retirement from the firm and their daughter Sarah's announcement of her judicial candidacy. The house smelled of rosemary lamb and expensive floor wax. It smelled like a successful life. The doorbell chimed. It was Sarah, looking sharp in a navy blazer, but her eyes were rimmed with red. She rushed past the foyer and gripped Martha's forearms. "Mom, I need to tell you something before Dad comes down," Sarah whispered, her breath hitching. "I found something in the old firm archives about the 1984 merger, about why you stopped practicing law." Martha's hand faltered on the mahogany. The 1984 merger was a ghost she had buried under layers of school bake sales and silent dinners. "Sarah, today is about your father. We don't dig up old dust. It's not dust, Mom. It's a paper trail. Dad didn't just ask you to stay home." Heavy footsteps thudded on the stairs. Arthur descended, adjusting his cuffs, his presence expanding to fill every inch of the hallway. He looked at them, his eyes narrowing at their proximity. "There are my girls," Arthur said, though his gaze went straight to Sarah, ready for the big night. "The partners are expecting a show of family unity. It's essential for the campaign." He walked over and placed a heavy, possessive hand on Martha's shoulder. "You look appropriate, Martha. Did you remember the vintage Bordeaux? It's in the cellar. I'll get it," Martha said softly, stepping out from under his hand. "Wait," Sarah said, her voice trembling with a dangerous mix of anger and discovery. "Dad, I was just asking Mom about the 1984 settlement. The one with the signatures that don't match." The air in the room curdled. Arthur's face didn't redden. It turned a stony, terrifying gray. He looked at Martha, not Sarah. "I thought we agreed that the past stayed in the basement, Martha. Is there a problem?" Before Martha could answer, the front door swung open again. Their son, David, walked in, holding a manila envelope. "Actually," David said, his voice cold, "the basement flooded. And I found the box you tried to burn." The manila envelope in David's hand looked heavy, weighted down by 40 years of accumulated secrets. He didn't hand it to his father. He walked straight to the kitchen island and dropped it onto the polished mahogany. The sound was a dull thud that seemed to echo through the rafters of the house. Arthur didn't move. He stood at the base of the stairs, the perfect image of a patriarch, yet his eyes were fixed on the envelope with a predatory intensity. "David, you're late. And you're tracking mud onto the rug. Your mother worked hard on this house today. The house is fine, Dad. The foundation, however, is rotting, David said, his voice tight. He looked at Martha, his expression softening with a pained kind of pity. Mom, why is there a non-disclosure agreement from 1984 with your name on it? And why is it signed by a trustee I've never heard of? Martha felt a cold prickle at the base of her neck. The threat without action she had lived under for decades was suddenly manifesting in the hands of her son. She looked at the envelope, then at Arthur. She remembered the night of the merger, the smell of rain. The way Arthur had knelt by her chair and told her that if she didn't step down from the firm, the scandal would destroy their newborn son's future. It was a different time, David, Martha said, her voice surprisingly steady. We made sacrifices for the family. Sacrifices. Sarah stepped forward, joining her brother. Mom, this isn't a sacrifice. This is a gag order. It says here that the firm's malpractice suit was settled using your inheritance. He used your money to pay for his mistake. And then he made you sign away your right to practice so you could never testify against the board. Martha felt the room tilt. She knew about the money, she had suspected it for years, but the details of the gag order were a jagged glass shard she had yet touched. She looked at Arthur, waiting for the denial, the roar, the explosion of authority. Instead, Arthur chuckled. It was a dry, hollow sound. I saved this family. If I hadn't handled that situation, we would have been penniless. Martha knew the stakes. She chose this life. She chose to be a wife and a mother. Didn't you, Martha? He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. It was a familiar tactic, the physical occupation of her space. Tell them. Tell them you were happy. Tell them how much you enjoyed the charity galas and the beautiful home I provided. Martha looked at the anniversary clock. Tick, tick. 40 years of ticks. She looked at her children, who were seeing their father's mask slip for the first time. The power shift was microscopic, but it was there. I chose to protect you, Martha said, her eyes locking onto Arthur's. But I never said I was happy. The front door chimes rang again. That will be the senior partners, Arthur snapped, his persona snapping back into place like a spring. David, put that filth away. Sarah, fix your face. Martha, get the wine now. The doorbell rang a second time, more insistent. Martha didn't move toward the cellar. She moved toward the envelope. The ringing of the doorbell was a physical assault on the silence of the room. Arthur's hand shot out, hovering inches from Martha's wrist as she reached for the manila envelope. It was a silent ultimatum, a ghost of the many times he had steered her away from uncomfortable truths. With a gentle squeeze of the arm or a pointed look across a dinner table. The door, Martha, Arthur repeated, his voice dropping to a low, vibrating register. Our guests are waiting. Don't let your imagination run away with you in front of the people who matter. Martha paused. She looked at his hand, the hand that had signed the checks. The hand that had pointed the way for her entire adult life. Then she looked at David. Her son was watching her with a desperate intensity. His fingers still resting on the edge of the documents that proved her life had been a calculated heist. The people who matter are already in this room. Arthur, Martha said. The air seemed to leave Arthur's lungs in a sharp hiss. He turned toward the door, his face twisting into a mask of practiced joviality as he went to greet the senior partners of the firm. Martha heard his booming laugh echo in the hallway, the sound of a man who believed he could still control the tide by shouting at the waves. Sarah leaned in close, her voice a frantic whisper. Mom, there's a ledger in here too. It's not just the legal documents. There are handwritten notes, dates, names of clients who were overbilled to cover the 1984 shortfall. It's all here. If this goes public, Dad isn't just retired, he's disbarred, and my candidacy. It's over before it starts. Martha felt the weight of her daughter's fear. This was the trap Arthur had built. He had woven his sins so tightly into the fabric of their children's success that pulling a single thread threatened to unravel everything they had worked for. "Is that why you're telling me this now, Sarah?" Martha asked, her voice tinged with a sudden, sharp clarity. "To ask me to keep being silent? To protect your seat on the bench?" Sarah flinched, as if struck. "Oh, no, I don't know. I just... I can't believe he did this to you. But if we burn him, we burn with him." David pulled a single yellowed sheet from the envelope. "Not necessarily. Look at the dates, Sarah. The overbilling continued long after the settlement. He wasn't just saving us. He was profiting. And Mom... there's a signature here from 5 years ago. On a property transfer for a cottage in Vermont. Did you sign this?" Martha stepped closer, squinting at the elegant, loopy script that bore a haunting resemblance to her own. She hadn't been to Vermont in 20 years. "I've never seen that document in my life," Martha whispered. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The silent partner role he had forced her into wasn't just about the past. He was still using her identity to shield his current maneuvers. Arthur reappeared in the doorway, flanking the firm's founding partner, Judge Miller. "And here's the woman behind the man," Arthur announced, gesturing toward Martha. "The silent strength of the Vance family." Judge Miller smiled, stepping forward to take Martha's hand.
"Martha, dear."
"Arthur was just telling us about the generous donation UVA decided to make to the university in his name. Of course. Truly a legacy for the ages." Martha felt the cold paper of the envelope beneath her palm. She looked at Arthur's smug, expectant face. "A donation?" Martha asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Arthur, why don't you tell the judge exactly which account that money is coming from?" Arthur's smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned into chips of blue ice. He stepped forward, his hand finding the small of Martha's back, pressing just firmly enough to be a warning. "Now, Martha, don't be modest. The judge doesn't need to hear about the boring logistics of our private estate. We're here to celebrate." Judge Miller chuckled, oblivious to the tectonic plates shifting beneath his feet. "Always the humble one, Martha. Arthur, you're a lucky man. Most wives would want their names in the headlines for a gift that size. I've spent 40 years keeping my name out of the headlines." "Judge," Martha said, her voice projecting with a legal clarity she hadn't used since the 80s. She felt Sarah and David go stiff beside her, usually at Arthur's request. But tonight feels like a night for... full disclosure. Arthur's grip tightened. "Martha the Bordeaux, you're becoming forgetful. Why don't you head down to the cellar? I'll finish explaining the endowment to the judge." It was a dismissal, the same one he had used at firm dinners for decades when the conversation turned to serious matters. Usually, Martha would offer a gracious nod and disappear. This time, she didn't budge. "Actually, Arthur, I think David should go to the cellar," Martha said, her eyes never leaving her husband's. "He's already been down there once today. He found some very interesting things, documents that were misfiled, or perhaps hidden." The room went unnaturally still. The other guests, a collection of the city's legal elite, began to drift toward the tension like moths to a flame. Arthur's face finally began to flush, a dull, angry crimson creeping up from his starched collar. "David was just being overzealous with the spring cleaning," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave into a low growl. "He found some old tax records. Nothing that would interest anyone here." "I don't know, Dad," David said, stepping forward, the manila envelope held firmly at his side. "I think a forged signature on a $500,000 property transfer is pretty interesting. Don't you, Judge Miller?" As a man of the law. The judge's smile evaporated. "Forged. Arthur, what is your son talking about?" Arthur's composure finally cracked. He let go of Martha's back and turned on David, his finger pointing like a weapon. "You have no idea what you're looking at. You're a child playing with fire. Give me those papers, now. They aren't his to give. Martha intervened. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through his rage. She reached out and took the envelope from David. The power shift was no longer microscopic. It was a physical redirection of the room's energy. Martha, Arthur hissed, leaning in so only she could hear. Think about Sarah. Think about her career. You destroy me. You destroy her. Is your pride worth her future? Martha looked at her daughter. Sarah was pale, her hands trembling, caught between the ambition her father had groomed and the truth her mother had endured. Martha saw the fear in Sarah's eyes, the same fear Martha had carried for 40 years. My pride. Martha whispered back. No, Arthur. This isn't about pride. It's about the truth. She turned back to the crowd, the envelope open. Judge Miller, since you're here, perhaps you can clarify something for me. If a partner uses a spouse's inheritance to settle a malpractice claim without their knowledge. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. A heavy thud sounded from the kitchen, followed by the sharp, unmistakable shattering of glass. Everyone, stay calm. Arthur shouted into the darkness. It's just the storm. But Martha felt a hand grip her wrist in the blackness, not Arthur's heavy hand, but a smaller, frantic one. In the sudden, thick darkness, the house felt like a living thing, breathing with the panicked whispers of the elite. The hand on Martha's wrist was cold and trembling. Mom, give them to me. Sarah hissed into her ear. If the judge sees those files in the light, I'm finished. Dad's right. We can handle this privately, please. Martha stood frozen. The daughter she had raised to be a pillar of justice was begging for a cover-up. It was the ultimate irony. Arthur's corruption hadn't just silenced Martha. It had infected the next generation. The threat without action had shifted from Arthur's bluster to Martha's own maternal instinct. Sarah, let go, Martha said, her voice a low, steady anchor in the dark. I can't let you do this. A flashlight beam cut through the foyer. It was David, standing by the kitchen archway, his face illuminated from below like a specter. The main breaker was tampered with, he announced, his gaze darting to where Arthur stood near the judge. Someone didn't want the lights on. Don't be dramatic, David. Arthur's voice boomed from the shadows, regaining its predatory confidence. It's an old house and a summer storm. Martha, stop upsetting Sarah. Give her the papers and let's get some candles. We have a dinner to finish. As the emergency lights hummed to life, casting a sickly, dim yellow glow over the room, the scene was cinematic in its tension. Arthur was closing the distance, his hand outstretched, his face a mask of fatherly concern that didn't reach his eyes. Martha stepped back, pulling her wrist from Sarah's grip. She didn't head for the kitchen or the cellar. She walked toward the center of the dining room, placing the manila envelope directly onto the serving platter where the lamb should have been. You're right, Arthur, Martha said, her voice gaining a resonant, melodic strength. We do have a dinner to finish. But first, let's talk about the 1984 settlement, the one Sarah found, the one that bought this house. The guests, including Judge Miller, hovered at the edge of the light, trapped between social etiquette and the voyeuristic thrill of a scandal. Martha, you're unwell, Arthur said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, soothing tone. The stress of the party. Perhaps you should lie down. I'll apologize to our guests for your outburst. He reached for her arm, his fingers tightening in a way the guests couldn't see, intended to lead her forcibly from the room. But Martha didn't flinch. She leaned in, her lips inches from his ear. If you touch me again, Arthur, I won't just tell them about the money, she whispered. A delayed information bomb she'd held for decades. Arthur's face went from gray to a ghostly, translucent white. His hand dropped as if burned. He looked at her as if seeing a stranger or a predator he had unrealized was in the room. You, ... You wouldn't, he breathed. I've stayed silent for 40 years for my family, Martha said, loud enough for every partner and judge to hear. But I realized tonight that my silence didn't protect my children. It only taught them how to hide. The telephone in the hallway began to ring, a shrill, piercing sound that broke the trance. "Don't answer that," Arthur commanded, but David was already moving. David picked up the receiver, his eyes locked on his father. The room remained suspended in a suffocating silence, broken only by the muffled, frantic voice on the other end of the line. Arthur made a move toward the hallway, but the sheer weight of the room's collective gaze pinned him to the spot. "Who is it? David?" Martha asked, her voice clear and unwavering. David lowered the phone, his face pale. "It's the firm's security desk at the downtown office. They're reporting a break-in at the private archives. Someone used your clearance code 10 minutes ago, Dad. They said the silent alarm triggered because the secondary vault was opened." Arthur's composure finally disintegrated. "That's impossible. I'm right here." "It must be a system error." Or perhaps Martha intervened, her tone conversational yet razor-sharp. "It's someone who realized that the physical evidence of your settlements needed to be moved before a judicial audit began. Someone who knew exactly where the 1984 files were kept." Judge Miller stepped forward, his professional persona replacing his dinner party warmth. "Arthur, what is going on? What secondary vault? The firm hasn't used physical vault storage for client files in a decade. It's private property," Arthur roared, his voice cracking. "Martha, you've poisoned them. You've taken 40 years of my hard work and turned it into a circus because you re-bitter about a career you were unstrong enough to keep." Martha felt the sting of the words, the old, familiar barb intended to make her feel small. For 40 years, she might have flinched. Tonight, she simply smiled. It was a small, chilling expression of newfound autonomy. "I wasn't strong enough to keep it, Arthur. Because I was busy keeping you out of prison," she said. She turned to the judge. "The archives David found in the basement were just the copies. The originals, the ones with the actual bank transfers from my father's trust, are likely being shredded or moved right now." "Mom, stop," Sarah pleaded, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. She looked at Arthur, then at the envelope on the table. The threat without action had shifted. The danger wasn't just to Sarah's career anymore, but to the very image of the man she had idolized. "I can't stop, Sarah," Martha said, "because if I do, you'll spend the next 40 years looking over your shoulder just like I did. You'll become a judge who owes her seat to a lie, and that is a debt you can never repay." Martha walked to the sideboard and picked up a silver letter opener. She didn't brandish it. She used it to neatly slit the seal on a second, smaller envelope David had pulled from his jacket pocket, one she had prepared weeks ago in anticipation of this exact night. "Arthur always said cruelty is loud," Martha remarked to the room, "but self-respect is quiet. I've been very quiet." She pulled out a single photograph. It wasn't of a legal document. It was a picture of Arthur at a lakeside cabin, shaking hands with a man the judge recognized instantly, a man currently under federal investigation for racketeering. "Arthur," Martha said, "tell them about the 1992 consultation fee." Before Arthur could speak, the front door burst open. Two men in dark suits holding badges stepped into the light. The arrival of the federal agents acted like a chemical catalyst, turning the simmering tension of the room into a cold clinical reality. The senior partners instinctively stepped back, creating a physical gap between themselves and Arthur. The family unity he had demanded was now a liability they couldn't afford. "Arthur Vance?" the lead agent asked, his voice devoid of the social deference Arthur had spent 40 years cultivating. "We have a warrant for the seizure of the firm's private archival servers and your personal financial records." Arthur's mouth moved, but no sound came out. He looked at the agents, then at the photograph in Martha's hand. The interruption at the peak moment had arrived. But it wasn't the disaster he had feared. It was the beginning of his erasure. "This is a mistake," Sarah stammered, her judicial instincts battling her filial loyalty. You can't just enter a private residence without the warrant was signed an hour ago. Counselor, the agent replied, glancing at Sarah with a look of professional pity. Based on a whistleblower deposition and corroborating digital evidence provided by an anonymous source, Arthur turned his head slowly toward Martha. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The anonymous source wasn't a disgruntled employee or a rival at the firm. It was the woman who had sat across from him at breakfast every morning for 4 decades. "You," Arthur whispered, his voice trembling with a cocktail of rage and disbelief. "You did this. You destroyed everything I built for us, for the children." Martha walked toward him, her pace measured and cinematic. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a strategist who had finally closed the trap. "I didn't destroy it, Arthur. I just stopped hiding the rot in the foundation. You built a house out of secrets and expected me to be the wallpaper." She turned to the judge and the gathered guests. "I apologize for the lack of Bordeaux, but I think the evening has reached its natural conclusion. Arthur, the agents will likely want to see the safe in the study, the one with the 1984 ledger." "I changed the code," Arthur hissed, a final, pathetic attempt at control. Martha reached into the pocket of her silk dress and pulled out a small, handwritten notebook. "I know. You've changed it to the date of your first major win at the firm, July 12th. You've always been predictable in your vanity." She handed the notebook to the lead agent. "Everything is in there. Every account, every consultation fee, and every document he forced me to sign under duress. I've been a silent witness for 40 years. I'm finished being silent." As the agents moved toward Arthur, David stepped to his mother's side, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. Sarah, however, remained frozen, watching her father's empire crumble. "Mom," Sarah whispered, "what happens now? My career. The campaign, .. Martha looked at her daughter, her heart breaking, but her resolve firm. "Now, Sarah, you win on your own merits, or you don't win at all. That is the only way the seat is worth having." The agents began to lead Arthur toward the door. He stopped at the threshold, looking back at the polished mahogany, the silver clock, and the woman who had finally stepped out of his shadow. The front door clicked shut, the heavy thud of the latch signaling the end of an era. With Arthur gone, the house felt cavernous, the air finally losing the pressurized weight of his ego. The guests had vanished into the night, fleeing the scene of a social execution, leaving only Martha, her children, and the debris of a 40-year masquerade. The silver anniversary clock on the mantel gave one final melodic chime. Martha walked over to it, her fingers tracing the cold glass dome. She reached behind the casing and slowed the pendulum until the ticking stopped. The silence that followed was not the oppressive void of the past. It was a clean, open space. "He'll never forgive you," Sarah said, sitting heavily at the dining table. She looked at the manila envelope as if it were an unexploded bomb, and the firm. "They'll bury his name. They'll bury us with him." "No, Sarah," Martha said, turning to face her daughter. "They'll try to bury the scandal, but you are not a secret. You are a talented lawyer who is groomed to be a pawn. Now, you get to be the player." Martha walked to the table and picked up a single document, the property transfer with the forged signature. "This is your leverage. Use it to ensure the firm's partners don't forget who you are. Don't ask for a favor. Demand what is yours." David looked at his mother with a mix of awe and a lingering, painful realization. "You've been planning this since the basement flooded, haven't you?" "No, long before that." "I've been planning this since the day I realized your father saw me as an asset instead of a person," Martha replied. She felt a lightness in her chest, a physical expansion of her soul. "I stayed for you, children. I stayed because I thought a broken home was a failure, but I was wrong. A home built on a lie is the only true failure." She went to the window, looking out at the rain-slicked driveway where the red taillights of the police cruisers were fading into the distance. She thought of the woman she was at 22, brilliant, ambitious, and silenced. She felt that woman's hand in hers now, a bridge across 40 years of endurance. "What will you do, Mom?" David asked. "This house, the money. It's all tied up in the investigation." Martha smiled, and for the first time in decades, the expression reached her eyes. "I have my own accounts, David. Accounts Arthur never knew existed. I've been a very efficient household manager for a long time." She straightened her dress, the silk smooth against her skin. She looked at the mahogany table, the rosemary lamb, and the life she had curated for someone else's glory. "I've spent 40 years being the silence in this house," Martha said, her voice a final, resonant note of victory. "Cruelty is loud, but self-respect is quiet. I'm going to go find out what my own voice sounds like when I am the only one listening." She picked up her coat, leaving the secrets on the table. For the first time in 40 years, Martha didn't look back as she walked out the door. She chose herself, and for Martha Vance, that was the only justice that mattered.